Hello and welcome to another episode of North 100. I'm Serge. Joining me today is Jeremy White, Alex Steacy,
hi-o,
and Liam Coughlan.
Hello.
Today's theme, we're going to be talking about deck building, specifically lessons we've learned over years of deck building, pitfalls to avoid, tips and tricks, some fun stuff like that. But first, a reminder that this stream, North 100, is brought to you by you over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. I'm excited for this episode, guys. What about you?
Same, stoked.
I am also
Definitely
excited.
one of the most important episodes.
So I want to start us off with our returning segment, the best card you're not playing. And on deck today is me.
Yep.
I have a pet card I'm very excited to talk to you guys about. It is Periphery Nodes, also known as the color-shifted version of Drop of Honey.
So technically it's two cards because these cards are identical.
Yeah,
Well, they're not quite identical.
color shifted.
Color and
Yeah.
price tag.
Price aside, I love these cards. I love these cards probably a little bit too much, and I think they're underplayed, which I think is one of the themes we're going to talk about, the best card you're not playing.
You have got to explain what this thing does.
So
Because
these are one-mana enchantments that come into play, and on your upkeep, on the controller's upkeep, it destroys the weakest creature.
destroy, not sacrifice.
Let me read that really quickly. Correct. Destroy. Doesn't target, and if there are two that are tied, you choose one of them. I love this card against aggro strategies. I think it's really disheartening if you're like a tempo player or an aggro player and you play a threat and I play this, and then you have to make the value judgment of, do I play out a second creature? Do I just keep feeding cards into Periphery Nodes and let it
Because
generate card advantage?
When there's no more creatures in play, you sacrifice perfect.
Yeah, the second
Correct.
part is you have to wait for the board to be completely empty before it goes away. So it just ratchets up the value over time. And I think this card is criminally underplayed, and I love it, and I want to see it in all of your brews.
Yeah, it's pretty stacksy.
Yeah, it is super stacksy. It's also really good in control. I played it in blue-white control that I played in the year-end championships
This
last year.
card gives me such a Tabernacle of Fendril Vale.
Yeah.
Vibe, you're just like, oh god, this is like, except it's it's like halfway between Tabernacle and the Abyss.
Yeah, it is.
What's one of
Because
those?
it's like the Abyss, but it starts at the bottom and just starts eating up.
Yep. This is one of those cards that you slam down, and your opponent is just like, there's a lot of words on this, and you're
Also,
like, yeah.
it's just like, how many creatures do you think you could kill with one white mana? If the answer was all of them,
if the answer is
this
even
card.
more than one,
Yeah.
I think is the great part. If you get two cards out of this, you're winning. Well, not winning, but you're doing pretty
No,
good.
you're
it's
winning.
pretty
Okay.
hard.
They're in pretty good shape.
I
Jared
imagine
played
it's hard
this
to make
and
it
Drop of
fun.
Honey in the same deck once in
Yeah.
Lands.
Yeah.
That was pretty hot.
I've run that in Enchantress before, but
Yeah.
Is there a specific reason that you called hi folks, Graham here. Is there a specific reason that you picked Periphery Nodes over Drop of Honey?
I wanted to skirt around the price tag issue. I'm going to be honest. I found out, I was talking to my co-host here before the show started, and I was like, let's talk about Drop of Honey. And they're like, did you know it's $800 now? And I was just like, pardon?
Yeah, median price on the site I'm looking at is $458, whereas Periphery Nodes median price is $750.
Hey!
Let's talk about the affordable option.
Another thing on that note is that Porphyry Nodes is white, whereas Drop of Honey's green. And you're more often going to play a low creature count deck in a white deck as
Yeah.
opposed to a green deck. So
Yeah.
Porphyry Nodes actually just
Is strictly better, I think, yeah.
It's not strictly better.
Well, no.
It just sees a lot
More
more
suited.
play
Bit more synergy in the
because
deck,
it fits into more decks just because of the color shiftedness
Yeah.
of it. You need to be a pretty niche deck to actually want to play Drop of Honey.
Bant Enchantress.
Lands is a great one.
Land. All right, moving on.
Okay.
We're building a deck. And I think
Or maybe you're building a deck.
Yeah. All right. So we're sitting down. It's time to build a deck. And I think the most important question when you start this off is, what am I playing?
Yeah, there's a few different ways you can start it. I think you either need to say like, all right, I really want to play a control deck, or I really want to play with this specific card. I really want to play with Thrun the Last Troll,
Or like an archetype.
or I really want to play. Yeah, I really want to play like an equipment-heavy Boros deck with all the equipment matters cards. Like, you need a pretty reasonable idea of a starting point.
Well, you need inspiration.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking for that inspiration, right? If there's not a card that's grabbing you, or there's not some strategy that like you immediately tend towards, whether you're either newer to Magic or maybe you're not super akin to like completely designing your own deck from the ground up. A good way to go about it is to sort of ask yourself what you typically like having your role be in a game, right? So if you like being the one who's answering everything, answering all the questions that happen over the course of the game, well, you might want to tend towards playing a control strategy.
More
if you
reactive.
like asking all of the questions,
If you like turning stuff sideways.
right. So one thing you might want to do is ask a lot of small questions, and they have to answer all of them, or else they're going to die, which is like aggro. Or you can try asking, which is sort of my favorite thing, asking one very complicated question, such as, "Can you beat me when I cast this Doomsday after duressing you with Pactum Negation and Force of Will in hand?" Right.
So I've cast 10 spells. What now?
Yes, what are you going to do? Or you might find yourself being like, well, I actually kind of like doing both those things. And for you, I say there's mid-range. So it is possible to sort of establish what you want to do.
Yeah, I think the question you sort of ask yourself is either, at its simplest, is what kind of magic do I like playing, or what kind of magic have I not tried playing that I would like to try?
Or the all-powerful third question, what kind of magic do I like forcing my opponent to play?
Yeah, that's fair.
Guilty. Yeah.
Yeah. Serge and I both guilty of playing prison and/or over-controlling strategies that force the game to go much longer than it normally would.
I've been told I'm the nicest person who'll ever strip mine line.
That was me. I said that.
It's like, oh man, he's playing the dirtiest, nastiest magic, but he's such a cool guy.
Yeah, you just can't get that mad at
I
him.
literally said it last week as I had no lands in play and there was an assembled legion on the other side of the board.
So we've answered the question of what am I playing? Where did my initial idea come from? What is my inspiration? However that idea comes from you. I think the important question after that is, how does this deck win? Like, what is my win condition?
Yeah, well, this is a thing that I see in like some decks. There's a couple of like first timer like Highlander deck building problems that show up, and like one of them is just like, this deck has no way to win, and it has like lots of really cool stuff, or just not enough ways to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like the classic you get is like you're playing a bunch of like 1 and 2 drops, and then you're playing a bunch of Wrath of Gods.
Yeah,
so like,
your
just
deck
like,
is unfocused. You're
they're all
looking to do
really-
more than one thing.
Yeah. So you're just like, although technically you have ways to win, you're sort of battling at odds with
you're
yourself
non-bowing really
with
hard.
winning the game.
Well, I
Yeah,
think we're
'cause,
all
like,
kind of hinting to the idea there of synergy, and sometimes winning is unique to the list you're playing, and there's different ways to do it, but it's making sure the cards you're adding build towards your win condition. So we hinted to, if you're a creature-based deck, you want to make sure you're enabling your creatures to win. You're not playing something that kills your own creatures. If you're a control deck, you want to have win cons that fit within that as well. So it's putting together a cohesive structure that fits with your theme and knows how it wants to win.
Yeah. Are you good?
Wow.
I was gonna say, well,
All of us win.
because that sort of reminds me of the other first time deck building problem that I see, which is like these heaps of good cards that need to pick a lane. Like I think I've actually seen a deck that had Goblin Guide and Inferno Titan in the same list, and it's like, those are both really good cards that do not belong in the same list. It's just like go one direction or the other. Like, so focus is a thing.
I think one word we really need to hit on is streamlining a deck. Just making sure that the deck is all, as Alex said, just like in the same lane, going the same direction, not somebody going down the wrong way on the one-way street.
Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just like Goblin Guide and Inferno Titan, as Alex mentioned. Don't
build that deck.
Yeah, not going in the same direction.
Well, and I think ultimately, once you've sort of settled on a basic deck idea, and you've got maybe what colors you're going to play, and you have a basic idea that you want to be an aggressive strategy or you want to be a controlling strategy, whatever, you want to sit down and say, okay, at the end of the day, how is my deck winning every game? And you can usually summarize that into like a one-sentence statement, right? So like, I can say, I'm planning to attack with creatures and use burn spells to reduce my opponent's life total to 0. You can say, I'm looking to assemble Kiki Jiki plus some kind of untapping creature in order to create infinite Pester Mites or Deceiver Exarchs or Restoration Angels to kill my opponent. You can say, I'm looking to get Voltaic Key and Time Vault onto the battlefield at the same time. And once you do that, it becomes much easier to look at a card and say, how does this card help me get to this one-sentence sort of game plan that I've outlined? And all of a sudden, if your plan is to play burn spells and attack with creatures early to reduce their life total to 0, you're looking at this Inferno Titan, and what you should think is, how am I ever casting this, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the other spells in my deck are really low mana cost and it
Right.
doesn't work.
Or maybe you look at it and you say, okay, I'm going to ramp up into this Inferno Titan and play some lock pieces, and then you should look at the Goblin Guide and say,
like, this
what the heck
doesn't
is this
work.
doing here? It's going to run into Chalice of the Void.
Yeah, or like I draw this on turn 10.
Right.
Goblin Guide doesn't help me on turn 10. That's not the strategy I'm looking for.
Yeah, and how late is your deck planning to go?
Yeah.
Is another thing you
When
have to
do
look
I
at.
wanna
Is
win?
like whether you're a proactive deck or a reactive deck is another big, overarching idea when
Jeremy,
you're.
what do those two terms mean in the context of Magic?
Yeah, so if you're a proactive deck in this format, you're trying to win the game by turn 5 if unimpeded.
Or on your terms.
Or earlier, yeah.
Yeah.
You're trying to.
You don't necessarily have to be trying to win early to be proactive, right? Prison decks are proactive.
Sure, you're trying to, to steal Liam's analogy earlier, you're trying to ask the questions as opposed to answer the questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think of
reactive
it.
decks are trying to play based off of what your opponent's doing, and proactive decks are trying to to some extent ignore what your opponent's doing and just play your game plan as powerfully
Questions
as you
in this context meaning cards that you are playing to force your opponent to deal with.
can. Yeah,
threats.
so like in the stacks example, smokestack, the card smokestack is a very powerful question. You're forcing your opponent to answer,
Yep.
or they
It's
will.
like, I need to get rid of this or it's going to
Or
attrition
nobody
me to
will have a
death.
board anymore.
Yeah, so
You know-
Smokestack, 4 mana artifact, for those who don't know that, during your upkeep, you can put a counter on it, and then during each player's upkeep, they have to sacrifice a permanent for each counter on Smokestack, and you can actually kind of trickily stack these triggers so that
Yeah.
you never end up sacking as much as your opponent
Yeah.
does, and also your deck is usually designed in a way that you can take
Disposable
advantage of the
things.
Smokestack
Yeah,
in
so
a way
like-
that your opponent can't.
Voltaic Brawler is a question, and Swords to Plowshares is an answer.
Yep. And that's not to say that proactive strategies won't also have answers and vice versa, but it's good to know, again, going back to the theme of your deck is what does it do, how does it win, do I understand how all the pieces come together and stuff like that. I'd like to talk about win conditions. We kind of hinted on stuff like that, but how would you define a win con and through theme and through synergy? And here's a harder part. This is something we've touched on and something we'll touch on probably in every episode forever. How do you actually go about evaluating a good card? Because we talked about Inferno Titan, we talked about Goblin Guide. Both are very, very good cards. But how do you evaluate if that is what you want your deck to do?
Well, I think there's 2 levels you need to evaluate cards on for
Okay.
Highlander. One is this card good in any context? Which is
It's
tricky.
important.
We'll get to that.
yeah.
And the other one is like, is this card good in my deck? Because we have a bunch of big lists of format staples that are just like tried and true, great cards. You know, we keep coming back to the example of Goblin Guide and Inferno Titan. They're both great cards that do not belong in the same deck, and that's the sort of secondary assessment you need to make. You need to look at things like, as Jeremy said, like how long you're planning on the game to go, how much mana you expect to have access to, or how much mana you're going to make yourself have access to. Or, you know, conversely, whether you want to try to get in there as quickly as possible and go very low to the ground, meaning that, you know, you keep your curve really low, you play out a whole bunch of threats sequentially and overwhelm your opponent.
And
Yes.
I think that it's important to understand that when we're talking about win conditions, it's easy to get bogged down and think of a win condition as a card, right? Like Consecrated Sphinx is a win condition.
Yep.
But it doesn't necessarily have to boil down to one card. Your win condition can also just be, you know, the plan that your deck is trying to execute, right? We talked about redundancy in the past, and odds are some decks aren't going to hinge on just like 6 or 7 cards to end the game.
Yeah.
Obviously some are, but there's 2 different types of win conditions, right? There's the win conditions which are just, you know, I'm playing.
Here's a bomb.
Right.
Well, like the 2 groups are like the obvious bomb type win conditions, like Inferno Titan or like Time Vault, just like things that clearly win the game by themselves. But there's another group, the Goblin Guide group, where it's like Goblin Guide and Falcon Wrathgorger and Zergo Bellstriker.
Well,
and
that win
Carries
condition
of-
is your opponent's life is 0 as quickly as possible.
Right.
Exactly,
In
but
that sense, Lightning Bolt is a win condition.
Yeah.
You know,
Because
it's like-
you understand it's the number of turns you want to win at. Your win condition is killing them as quickly as possible.
the important thing to note is that a Lightning Bolt may be a win condition in the Goblin Guide deck, but it's likely not a win condition in the Inferno Titan deck.
Yeah.
Even though both decks are likely playing Lightning Bolt.
Yeah. Yeah, in that case, it's an answer. It might be an answer to a planeswalker
Exactly.
or a creature, and maybe incidentally you finish off a player with bolts in the big red version. Or
And
something
that sort of goes back to what the overarching strategy you're going for is, like, how long you want the game to last, whether you're the proactive deck or the reactive deck.
Yeah.
What role Lightning Bolt is playing in your deck.
You can also, I think, a kind of neat way to summarize a win condition is you can look at a win condition as a game state that your deck needs the game to be in to be winning, right? So for a control deck, your win condition, the game state is probably something like, I have more cards in hand than my opponent, I have some threat on the board, and my mana is untapped. If you're a blue-based control deck, if you're other control decks, it's going to be slightly different. Whereas
like,
for an aggro deck, your board state that is your win condition is their life total is 0. Right? Yeah. Like that's actually the board state we're looking for.
Control is I just wrathed and I can play a planeswalker next turn. You're like, I'm probably doing well as control.
Right.
And like the aggro deck is like their life total is 4 and I'm untapping with 5 creatures that have evasion.
Right. And
and
it's interesting, this is why playing mid-range is often very hard, because we keep switching back between combo, control, and aggro examples because it's very obvious what your win condition is. And if you have aspirations of building a mid-range deck, I would highly encourage you to do so. It's not a problem.
They're real good.
They are very good, but one of the inherent challenges with A, building them, and B, playing them, is understanding that these are the decks where the win condition is contextually going to be different game to game, even in the same matchup. So if you're playing green-black control, your win condition against mono-red is what I was talking about. It's your life total is around 10, you've got 1 or 2 creatures on board, ideally one of them has lifelink, maybe you have Sorin Markov in play. That's the kind of win condition you're looking for. Whereas in a different matchup against control, your win condition actually looks like, yeah, my life total might be low, but I have more cards in hand than them. I have more lands in play than they do.
Now.
Right, exactly. And so
trying to
being
get
able
some
to
card
identify that is important. And in deck building, you want to make sure you make decisions about your deck that allow you to get to those win conditions as best as possible.
Yep.
And in many different matchups as well.
And that actually brings me to my next point really nicely, which is consistency. So how do you get to your win condition in a format, in a 100-card singleton, which is inherently inconsistent? And so you can do that in a couple of different ways. One is through trying to make a very, very consistent deck list. We talked about that with a red deck, of trying to put as many burn spells at a number of times.
Redundancy.
Or through tutors, or through card draw. There's all kinds of really neat ways to talk about consistency in deck building.
Yeah, it's in a 100-card format, you either play as many almost the same cards as possible along one type of linear strategy, or you play a bunch of cards that facilitate you finding the few cards that you need. So mono red or like mono black or something like that, it just plays a bunch of lightning bolts or a bunch of 2/1s for 1. Whereas like your sort of like blue X based decks will play draw spells like Impulse, Brainstorm, stuff like that. Ponder. So they're looking at virtually more cards than
There's a lot of green-based creature decks that use a lot of creature tutors to sort of act like a blue deck as well. They use cards like Birthing Pod, Survival of the Fittest.
Eladamri's Call.
Creature tutors like Green Sun Zenith, Worldly Tutor, Eladamri's Call, Court of Calling.
We're just like rapid firing through all the tutors right here.
Sorry, Graham.
Also, sorry for the viewers. So we went through a list of blue cantrips. The whole goal being to try and see as much of your deck as possible. And normally in the blue strategy, you have enough mana open or enough land in your deck that you're not falling behind despite spending a little bit of mana each turn. And in the green deck, gives you access to a lot of creature tutors. So you're hoping that you'll have the answers you need to your win con within the creatures themselves. So use the creature tutors to try and make your deck more consistent. Make your when I talk consistency, this is a point I like to hammer on is you want to make it so every time you sit down and you play the deck, it feels like the same deck. You don't want to.
For the most part, like there's always going to be variances, but you want it to, broadly speaking, do the same thing.
You want to be able to continually get to your win condition.
You don't want it to misfire, which is a problem in an inconsistent deck, especially in a ramp deck. Something I've experienced before is you have a deck, you have a game where it's all ramp and no payload, or all payload and no ramp, and so you're either like, I have 1 million mana and I have nothing to cast, or you're like, I can't actually cast any spells in my hand, and that I think, obviously there's variance because there's variance inherent in this format, but sometimes that could be a deck construction issue.
You'd be like, am I playing enough lands? Am I playing enough threats? Am I playing enough ramp spells? And, getting that balance just right.
And sometimes you can. That's like one of the issues with the ramp deck is like, if the ramp deck worked every time,
It'd be the best deck.
it would be the best deck in the
Yeah.
format.
Right.
But like, because you're just casting
You mean
overcosted things earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because this is from the perspective of someone who's never built a Highlander deck, but I know that we've had
Never
this
built
conversation
Highlander deck yet.
Yes.
But I know that we
We'll
had
get
this
you.
conversation before, Alex, where you're talking about a deck that wants a tutor. It'll run, all the good tutors. I know that one of them at least is pointed.
Yeah, well, a bunch of them are.
And
but-
then, it'll run all the best tutors, and then all the good tutors,
And then all the okay
And then
all the
maybe
okay
one or two
tutors.
bad tutors.
Like, at what point does that,
So-
at what point does that sort of rule crater out? Like,
Yeah.
where do you
Here's the thing.
balance the
Here's how it
consistency and
works
wanting
is-
some? Yeah.
The decks that want to play every remotely playable tutors are generally speaking combo decks because they
Yeah.
want to find this thing and this thing that when you have them together you win.
Yeah, and there are no duplicates of
There's
them.
no-
Is the
and-
important
and
thing.
They're like there's no second copy of Time Vault.
So Painter Servant Grindstone.
There's
Time Vault.
Yeah, there's only one card like that exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to play,
Yeah.
and if your deck is just like I want to win with Time Vault, I need to find this one card that I only have one copy of. So I have to play a bunch of good tutors, some okay tutors, some dirty tutors, some embarrassing tutors.
Well, and what some decks will even do is they'll tutor for tutors.
Yep, tutor for a better tutor.
That's what the Storm deck did for a long time
Yep.
before it was ravaged and had Demonic Tutor pointed, so it could no longer play Demonic Tutor Black Lotus. But
Yeah.
basically, the way
Crocodile Tears.
That's fair, yeah,
the way
like-
that the Highlander Storm deck used to work was that if you could assemble Black Lotus plus Demonic Tutor plus a little bit more mana, you could just win the game straight up. Because what you could do is Demonic Tutor is a 2-mana tutor that finds any card. Black Lotus, most people should know, it's 0 mana, makes 3 mana. And what you could do is you could just crack the Lotus, and you could search with Demonic Tutor. You could go find ill-gotten gains. You could,
Yogg-Will.
Yeah, you would ill-gotten gains back your Lotus and your Demonic Tutor plus your other thing that made mana. Then you would cast those all again. You would go get Yawgmoth's Will. You'd go do it again, and then you'd Tendrils of Agony them. So actually, Storm was just a 2-card combo deck.
find these two cards in.
Plus, you needed some other source of mana. Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Lion's Eye Diamond. They all worked. But as a result, you were really tutoring for tutors really aggressively.
So at the risk of clarifying that point for you, how bad of X kind of card you include in your deck goes back to your earlier point for how is your deck actually winning.
Exactly.
I have
Yeah.
I have an example I love to give on this one, which is I'm a control deck, and now I need to ask myself the question of how many counterspells do I have to put in my deck in order to see how many every game. And so am I the kind of control deck that wants to counter one spell consistently every game? Do I want to counter 2 spells every game? And then you start doing the math. You're like, well, I have 100 cards. I might not be drawing stuff. Or say I need to have a counterspell in my opening 7 in order to make this keepable. When you start looking, you're like, well, I probably need to have like 15 counterspells in my deck. And then you start going from the top down of how many playable counterspells are there. I think Jared did the math the other day. It was like 40? You went
there's-
pretty
Well,
deep?
Jared played 37 counterspells.
I played 37.
There are some pretty bad ones.
I've played as many as 44 in a deck.
Yeah, but that goes to the question of the tutor as well, which is how many tutors do I need to win? Do I need 1 tutor to win? If am I 1 card away from winning the game at any point?
Yeah, it's like how, it comes back to having this, your win condition based around 1 or 2 cards. That's when you play all those, the diminishing returns number of tutors.
Yeah.
Whereas other
aren't-
decks that just like play a lot of redundant threats will sometimes play like a couple of like the highest end tutors as kind of silver bullet cards. So for example, like Eladamri's Call is a tutor that shows up in a lot of creature-based decks, and like sometimes not even any other tutor, but Eladamri's Call is just really, really good. Or it's like,
Can you introduce that card really quick?
yeah, Eladamri's Call is white-green instant. Search your library for a creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your
So
library.
it finds any creature
Finds
in your deck.
anything. So this
Okay.
is the sort of
at instant speed, which
yeah,
is a
it's-
big deal.
It's,
Oh, yeah.
it's really good. It's like, what if Demonic Tutor was an instant? So it's like
This isn't Demonic Tutor.
But in some decks.
One of the
But
classic
yeah.
plays with this card is instant speed, go get Aven Mind Sensor, cast Aven Mind Sensor
Yup.
in response to your opponent's, say, Demonic Tutor,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
can only search the top 4.
Yeah, or so this one, Eladamri's Call is like really like top end of the creature tutors, and it sees a lot of play in creature-based decks. Just because it's kind of a wild card. And you
it's
play
good-
it
it's
just
good in
because of
everything.
its enormous quality, because you're just sort of like, what do I need right now
Yep.
of this like cornucopia of types of creatures?
Well, and the big thing about
that I
it is
have.
that, like Jeremy said, is that it's an instant. It's so low opportunity cost to play. It's very different from a card like, say, like Altar of the Bone or something.
Secret tech.
Which is like green, which is the same card, but it's a sorcery that you have to sack a creature for.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, the opportunity cost on that card skyrockets, and it's not as good to put in any given deck. It's really only good in the decks that
Creature
want a creature
Really
really
need that.
bad
Really
that
need it.
turn.
But that brings up the idea of card advantage. So the other reason that Eladromi's Call is better than Altar of Bone is Eladromi's Call doesn't cost you a card. Where Altar of Bone, if you don't have a token in play, you're having to sacrifice something. So, and we were talking about this before and how you evaluate your win condition. Oftentimes, regardless of the deck, if you have card advantage over your opponent, you're probably ahead.
Would you like to briefly define card advantage, just because we bring this up a lot? And
Oh,
I think just
man.
explaining it once would be.
I don't know if I have a succinct definition of it.
I do. If
Do you?
like.
Sure, yeah, take
so,
it.
So at the end of the day, in most games of Magic, you can do all of this like complicated. What's their life total? What's my life total? What's my mana curve look like? What colors am I playing? But at the end of the day, it's sort of just about having more stuff.
Sure.
Card advantage is just about having more stuff than your opponent. So at the end of the day, yeah, Ancestral Recall, good card advantage card. If what you want to look at is how many, like if you were to count up how many lands you had in play, how many creatures you had in play, how many cards you had in hand, how many relevant cards you had in the graveyard, and compared that to your opponent.
What you have access to.
If your number is higher, you are often doing better.
Yeah.
Now, I say often because it's contextual. There are times
course.
where being really far behind on board, but being really far ahead in hand, well, you're actually not necessarily in better shape, but you do still technically have card advantage.
Yep.
So, I mean, you can really define card advantage quite simply, right? It's just who has more stuff.
Yeah, you can use card advantage to stabilize in a negative position. I was playing against a mono red player the other day, and I stabilized at 2 life. And I stabilized by casting a Leyline of Sanctity, so they can no longer use burn spells to target me. And then I cast Moat, which meant the creatures on the ground could no longer attack me. And yes, I'm a monster. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun way to play Magic.
But you look at these 2 cards, Leyline of Sanctity and Moat. In both of these cases, what they do is they're actually restricting how many playable cards my opponent has. So despite the fact that they have these resources, they can't use them, and so I'm generating advantage. And so I have no cards in hand. My opponent has 5 cards in hand. They have 4 cards on the battlefield, but there's no way that they can beat me in that current state. And then I went back to resolve a Sarkhan, the Dragon Planeswalker, and then slowly chip them from 20 to death with the Planeswalker
Yeah, just
turn
attack
after
over
turn.
5.
There's one other really simple way to define card. Like card advantage appears in a lot of different contexts, but the one I like to use is the 2 for 1.
The 2 for 1.
So-
Yep.
Flame Tongue Kavu.
Yep.
Perfect example of card advantage. You play a card, a creature,
Yep.
that blows up one of their cards.
Yeah, so 3
Another
of the red
creature.
for a 4/2 that deals 4 damage or something when it enters the battlefield.
You're up 1, they're down 1.
Yeah.
So there's like a 2-card delta.
Yeah.
Right,
and they-
you've
and they-
killed a card with this Flame Tongue Kavu, then they have to spend another
still
card
have
to
to
kill
answer
it.
it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
Flame Tongue Kavu got 2 cards and it
So-
only cost you 1.
Yeah. In a sense, this could be better than something like Flame Slash.
Yep.
Not always.
Yeah.
Frequently not. But
Yeah.
that like making the optimal play with a Flame Tongue Kavu
No.
is really backbreaking.
Great comparison. Both do 4 damage to a creature. However, one leaves you with a 4/2 afterwards.
Yeah, it's like imagine if you could cast Flame Slash and you also had a 4/2 that you could kill them with. So
Yeah, it's obviously very powerful.
it's very good.
I think the other thing too, we've sort of talked a bunch about card advantage, and I think we're just trying to get back to consistency a little bit more.
Right.
When we're talking about consistency, we spent a lot of time talking about tutors, and then a lot of time talking about redundant cards, right? Cards that read the same. So, Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning are very similar. It's important to note, though, that another way that you can get redundancy is that you can have cards that are similarly useful in the same matchup, because not every deck is going to have the luxury of burn of saying, yeah, I have 16 functional reprints. And so as a result, you have to look at your deck and be like, okay, I want to draw, 1 card that's going to be good against aggro. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to draw exactly Kitchen Finks, but you want to look for, cards that are good against aggro. And you can find those in a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah.
You can find lifelink creatures, you can find things like Kitchen Finks, you can also, play cards like Healing Leaves if you'd like.
Maybe
you shouldn't.
Nobody plays
maybe
Healing.
Wall of Omens.
Right,
You know,
Wall of Omens is
a
good.
a 2-mana wall that cantrips when it comes
Wall
to
of
play.
Omens, also card advantage.
Healing Leaves, by the way, is the color.
Oh, no!
It's 1 green for prevent 3 damage or target player gains 3 life. Don't actually play this card.
Why wouldn't you go with the OG cycle and just say Healing Salve?
I like.
I mean, it was printed at the same time as our
The art
favorite
on
card,
Healing Leaves
Ancestral.
is like
Lightning
pretty
Bolt.
great.
Yeah, the art on
pretty
Healing
cool.
Leaves is pretty insane. And also, Healing Salve is white, and like, you already have a lot of good, effective ways to not lose life as white. Whereas in green, you're kind of on like creatures or like really bad life gain spells, this being chief amongst them.
I like that we're just talking about 1-mana white and green color shifted cards. It's like this sub-theme of the episode.
It is thematic.
I wanted to bring something up that just popped into my head.
Sure.
Because we're talking about redundancy. There is
Yep.
one other thing to consider when you're building your deck, and that's flexibility. The Lucky Charms deck that Liam built is a great example of
Yeah, that
how
deck was pretty flexible.
flexibility in this format especially can be very powerful. So
Do you know there are 7 ways to bounce a Grafted War Gear that you can have in your hand at the same time? I found out.
awkward.
Were you facing a Grafted War Gear? You're like, I have so many answers.
Yeah, that Grafted War Gear killed a lot of good men.
Damn.
And women.
Why'd they keep recasting it? Well, they're like, there's no way he's going to bounce it again.
Yes.
So yeah, so you can play a bunch of cards that achieve largely the same end. You can also play a bunch of cards that are good in many different situations and many different matchups. And we talk about charms being a good example because they're modal cards, which means there's usually several different effects that you can choose from. And that makes them really prized in Highlander in a lot of formats, just because you have this and it's almost
I lost
always
a
going to be
sneeze.
good. I hate that. It's almost always going to be good. So like, I don't know, Cryptic Command. Why? This card costs triple blue. Why does every blue deck play it? Well, it does everything.
I think there's a fine line in there too, because sometimes when you're reviewing new decks, people try and put a plan B in. You're like, I'm an aggro deck, but I also play Planar Servant Grindstone. Like, that's not the type of flexibility
Well,
we're
that's
talking
not-
about.
no.
The type of flexibility we're talking about is like Scavenging Ooze. Scavenging Ooze is this great aggro creature that might also just happen to counter Storm deck when they're putting non-creature permanents into their deck to try and recur it.
Or save you from the mono red deck by playing it on turn 6 and then tapping the rest of your 4 mana and
Yeah.
gaining 4 life.
Yeah, like that sort of flexibility. Or these, I mean, I love Highlander because it gives you these weird interactions to play with cards that you never see before because there's just more variance of what you're going to come up against.
I think Reclamation Sage fits in here as well because it's a good answer to
Everything.
Well, to like any artifact or enchantment, and even if they have neither of those things, it's a 2/1 that attacks.
Yeah,
it
does cost 3 mana.
Which is
But
a lot,
whatever.
and maybe too much. But sometimes you just really need something.
Sometimes you got to do it.
Sometimes you need something like anyone to pick up GT to finish the job.
I want to bring us to another point that I think is very important to deck building, which is the mana curve.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about consistency, we've been talking about different versions of the same card. So you're like, I love a 1-mana tutor. I love a 2-mana tutor. I might love the right 3-mana tutor. What about a 4-mana tutor? What about a 5-mana tutor? I mean, Storm plays 5-mana tutors.
Not really.
No,
What
like,
about the one that
you play.
that has spell mastery?
Yeah,
and it
that's
gets-
not
That's a 2-mana
a 5-mana tutor.
That's a
It costs
2-mana.
2.
We're talking about Dark Petition.
Dark
So Dark
Petition.
Petition is
So
three-
look in the top right corner of
Yeah.
that card and
And
tell me
then
how
look
much
at the
mana it is.
bottom.
text
I-
box. So
Alright.
Dark Petition for the listeners at home is 3 black for a sorcery that searches your library for a card, puts it in your head. It just diabolic tutors, demonic tutors, whatever you want to call. But it also has spell mastery, which says if there are 2 or more instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard,
never gonna have that.
add black to your mana pool. I actually cast it without having it on Monday. And it was
Against
still good.
me! You paid 5! That's a 5-mana spell. I will not be silenced.
No, I got 3 black and then killed you with it. The 3 black was integral to casting the time spiral.
I think I've cast this card maybe 40 times in Highlander. I think I've missed on Spell Mastery maybe once when my opponent had a Rest in Peace.
This card costs 2. The tutor that costs a lot of mana that I will accept costs a lot
Okay.
of mana is Behold the Beyond.
Or Diabolic
Or
Revelation.
Diabolic Revelation, but these are like super niche
Behold the
cards.
Beyond, isn't that like 8 mana?
It's 7 mana. You discard your hand and you find 3 cards. But again, in Storm, it's still lethal.
It reads you in the game.
yeah.
does read you in
One
the
of
game.
my favorite mana cost arguments I've ever had with a Highlander player is with Allison, specifically over the card Tassiger.
Oh.
So Tasigur has Delve. And her and I had this long-running bet, which was, she's like, if I ever have to spend more than 2 mana for Tasigur, I'll give you $1. And I think it was about 2 years went by, and she just sends me a text message out of nowhere being like, I owe you $1. And I'm like,
You're
oh.
welcome. That game was against me.
Yeah? And I was like, you finally had to spend more than 2 for Tasigur? And she's like, yeah, but to be fair, I cast it 4 times that game.
I had Caracas.
Woof.
I think in her deck in particular, not to get too
Woof.
tangential, she's not really taxing her graveyard very much, so Tasigur almost always going to cost not that much.
So let's talk about the mana curve. You've got
Sure.
an aggro deck, you've got a control deck. Like, what are you looking for?
How low can you go?
Well, we were talking about Goblin Guide and Inferno Titan. That's 2 very different curves. So in the Inferno Titan deck, 6 is okay, but we kept saying they don't belong in the same deck. Somebody want to try and answer why?
Okay, so your aggro deck wants to rely, pretty broadly speaking, on inexpensive, very efficient threats. So it wants to get to maybe 3 mana sources, like 3 lands of some sort in a game, and that's all it needs to play out these ones, because it'll play like 1-drop, or like turn 1 it'll go 1-drop, turn 2 it'll go like 2 more 1-drops or a 2-drop, then turn 3 maybe a 3-drop, and then just have a bunch of like really, really low costed spells. So like, you know, the mono red deck plays all these, which is a very low curve deck.
Yeah.
Plays like, you know, lightning bolt, chain lightning, all these like 1 and 2, occasionally 3 mana spells that just like
The best 3 mana spells.
face your opponent as hard as possible.
I think the important thing to add on that is once you have 3 mana in play, you want to have a higher probability of drawing more gas every turn instead of drawing more lands. So once you're putting down that pressure, you want to make sure that you're continuing to keep the gas pedal down. Because if you draw 3 lands in a row, you're kind of hosed. You
Well,
don't-
it's also related to what your opening hands, what you want your opening hand to look like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a mono red deck and you're playing all these 1-drop spells, you do not want 3 lands in your opening hand.
it's
you
pretty
want
bad.
you want to keep 2. You can keep 1.
Maybe.
No, 2 is fine. 2
Yeah.
two is like the number you want. Like,
1 is very questionable.
Brief aside, gas in this context means relevant cards that
Yeah.
will help you win the game.
yeah, so you like in the mono red deck, for instance, you want to keep a 5-spell 2-land hand,
Yep.
like 99%
dream.
of the time.
Yeah,
So as a result, you want to build your deck in a way such that your opening hand is going to look like that most of the time. Jared, do you want to?
And one of the reasons you want that is because your plan is for the game to not go very long. So you're only seeing 4 or 5 more cards that
Right.
did not start in your hand.
Right.
Whereas if you're a control deck, you can keep some sort of speculative hands that have like 3 lands and 4 spells, but a bunch of the spells are like impulse or ponder, so you don't actually know what these spells are going to do.
But they'll probably find something.
Yeah, but you're looking for the game to go past turn 10, so you're going to see
way more cards.
way more cards than your aggro opponent is planning for you to see.
Yeah, and then where this gets a little bit confusing as far as mana curves go is when you start playing with decks that want to jump the mana curve in some way, right? And
Acceleration, ramp decks.
So the
Yeah.
Inferno Titan deck we've been talking about probably isn't trying to cast Inferno Titan on turn 6.
No.
Right? Unless
trying
it's
to
Blue
cast-
Moon, which is a control deck, which
Yeah.
is using it as a finisher. But in general, yeah, you want to cast this Inferno Titan on turn 4 or turn 5.
Yeah. 4 would be great. 3, you're just like soaring mountain Mox. Bear, 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 bear.
Yeah. So when we're looking at mana curves, it's important to look at how much mana your deck can reasonably produce. So in the case of mono red, you're making 1 more mana each turn, maybe 2 if you draw your Mox, but odds are you're always going up in increments of 1. And you have to ask, how many spells do I need to draw in the time frame that my game plan needs to be enacted? Sorry, that was a wordy sentence. But
No, I like that a lot. That's great.
but yeah, how many cards am I actually going to draw? And in the case of mono red, like Jar said, it's 3,
4,
maybe
5,
4,
yeah.
right? And so as a result, you want to structure your deck in a way such that you are going to draw the required number of spells, right? So playing 40 lands in a mono red deck is not a good idea because
playing 33 is.
right. And just to talk about specific numbers, because I'm sure people are going to be curious about this.
That's the next point I have. Is
How
actually let's
much
talk about the
land
mana base.
Yeah.
should I play?
So Alex, how many lands are you running?
Oh my god.
Alex doesn't know he's no. I'm kidding.
I'm gonna get you, Jaeger.
So in general, I think that these are just like very broad numbers, and problematically, it's contextual on what's in your deck.
Yeah.
But very, very broadly, you can go from here. If you're playing an aggro deck, I like 33, 34.
Yeah.
I include Moxen. I don't include lands like Wasteland. I tend to count them as halves. Wasteland and
I
Strip
agree.
Mine, I count them as half lands because a lot of the time they're not actually lands.
Yeah.
Especially in a low curve deck, they don't actually cast about half the spells in your deck just
Exactly.
because they don't cast any of your 1-drops.
Yeah.
A lot of your
That's
2-drops are
actually
going to
a
be
great way of thinking
double
about it. I've
color.
never thought about that.
Yeah.
It like
Yeah.
that.
So you actually have to look at how many spells these actually help cast.
Yeah.
And so I came up with about half in most of the decks I play, so I only count them as half a
What
land.
do you count Mishra's Factory? Do you call that a half as well, or is that a
Yeah.
1?
That's a half as well, and I'll often
It depends on what you're playing it in.
Yeah.
In blue-white control, I'll count it as a full land.
Exactly.
In mono red, I'll only count it as one. But
And
Jared's point is the important one here. It's how many of your spells does it actually help you cast?
Okay, so
Yeah.
in that case, well, in all cases, Mazavith never counts
No,
as a land.
does not count as a spell.
Mazavith
Counts
is-
as a spell.
Yeah. So Mazavith is a land that you can tap to remove a creature from combat and untap it.
It's
so
Important to note.
It's a land,
It's
but
a-
it does not tap for mana, so don't count it
Yeah.
in your mana source.
Yeah,
count.
so when you're putting a mana base together and you put Mazavith into your mana base, quote unquote, it's not a land. It shouldn't be part of your mana
It's a
base.
spell.
It's a spell. Same thing is true of Dark Depths. Dark
Yep.
Depths is not a land.
Yep.
It's a spell.
Yep.
it doesn't matter how many Urborgs you're playing in your deck. It's a spell.
You can play one.
You can
No,
play
no.
two.
What?
Riftstone Portal.
No, you
Riftstone
can play
Portal's
3.
Good. I also like what's the 3-mana rock? The
Chromatic Lantern. I'm actually talking about like literal Urborg. There's Urborg.
And then Urborg,
sure.
the bad one.
Yeah, there's a bad Urborg.
Does
Urborg
make
Tomb
those
of
small?
Yawgmoth.
No, I know, but it's a
And
second
just
Urborg you
Urborg.
can play in your deck.
You got body.
Okay.
But so in general, let's get the numbers out and then maybe we can talk about it
Yeah.
more broadly. So in aggro, I like 33, 34. In
Okay.
mid-range, I like somewhere in the 36, 37 range,
agree.
contingent on how much ramp you're playing. For control, I play 40. And
Easily.
40 to
Easily 40,
42.
and I would actually lean higher than that
Yeah.
if possible. And then I'm no expert in prison, so prison experts, please tell me how to not have fun. How many lands do I
My
play?
last prison list, I had 37 lands, but I had 14 mana producing rocks.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
my goal is to get mana out and then get rid of it.
Yeah, so maybe now let's unpack why each of those numbers are what they are. So for aggro, we've talked about it a bunch. You want to draw lots of spells. You want to be actively casting spells every turn, and you really only want to draw maybe 1 or 2 lands in the middle of the game.
And one of the easiest ways to lose a game for aggro is to flood out, which
Yeah.
means to draw too many lands.
It sucks.
You can't keep the pressure.
Because your
You
deck
can't
that-
control the tempo.
that can conceivably win on like 2 lands sometimes.
Yeah.
Easily, yeah.
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 Yeah,
draw
like
the right
the mono
combination of
red
spells.
deck can go just like aggro guy, burn spell, burn swirl, price of progress, you're dead.
Yeah.
GG.
Yep.
Fire blast.
So for mid-range,
Fire blast. Yeah.
for mid-range, we're playing like 36, 37.
Maybe
and-
some mana dorks?
Right, and exactly, that's the other thing. Mid-range decks are often green, and when they're not, they usually have some artifact mana.
Or they just play blue. So look like Jeskai's a mid-range deck.
Yeah, Jeskai's a mid-range deck as
Those
well,
are-
so they
those
have
are-
draw spells, which functionally help you find
I was
more
gonna
lands.
say, yeah, those help to smooth out the draws.
And
to
those
make
decks
sure.
have often been going up to 38, 39 lands
Well,
even.
and they've been playing things like Tithe as well, which
Exactly.
can sort of
Man,
count as a mana source.
Secret tech, Tithe.
Yeah, Tithe is very good.
I'm actually really surprised
Tithe
by how
is
many
1
people,
white mana.
Yeah.
So Tithe is 1 white mana. Search your library for a Plains card. If you control fewer lands than target opponent, so if you're one opponent in this format, you can search your land for 2 Plains cards. And
Any
reveal them.
planes cards.
Yeah, and so that's why these are good. The cycle lands are really good to this card.
Yeah,
You
I
can
was
now
gonna say.
cast Tithe to find a draw. You can just draw a card.
It
with
often
it.
goes and
cycle.
gets irrigated farmland,
You can get
which
irrigated
is the
farmland.
blue-white one.
It fixes your mana, which is pretty
It
insane.
finds any of the
It's also an instant.
yeah. It finds any of the original duels, any of the Ravnica duels, any of the
Zendikar duels.
Zendikar duels.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And the other important thing about it, have you ever had a Mystical Tutor in hand and wished you could Mystical Tutor for a land? Well, now you can. That's actually why some of them started playing it, right? You have Mystical Tutor in your deck. You want it to be a toolbox for every situation. And putting Tithe in your deck is something that lets Mystical Tutor be a toolbox for every situation. Are you stuck on 2? Mystical Tutor for Tithe. And you're good to go.
And it's a deck where spells actually matter. You're playing cards like Young Power Mentor, you're playing cards like Monastery Mentor, and often drawing a land card late is super dead, whereas often drawing Tithe late, while not ideal, it at least does something as
can get
opposed
the
to
land or
just drawing a
something.
land.
Yeah, okay.
You can Tithe for the cycling land, and then you got maybe a Monastery Mentor trigger, plus you get to cycle this land away.
Yeah.
So it's
I want to
So-
talk about one more thing in mana base before we start wrapping things up, and that is lands that enter the battlefield tapped. So because a lot of these are very powerful, like the creature lands or the cycle lands, for example, enter play tapped. How do you evaluate them? How many do you put in?
So it depends on how many lands you're playing. I think in the aggro decks, you want to play 0.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even like Barbarian
almost all the time. Barbarian
Ring.
Ring comes
Barbarian
in
enters on
untapped.
tap. What's the one I don't like? Gitu Encampment.
Yeah.
I don't even like Gitu
Not
Encampment.
in mono red, no. Yeah, we've been using the mono red example, so no. In mono red, you want 0 come into play tapped lands.
Because you're in a big hurry.
You can't
or
stumble.
mono white.
Or
You know, any of the really
yeah.
aggressive decks.
Yeah. In mid-range decks, you can usually afford a couple. Typically, these slots go to creature lands, sometimes a cycling land.
Yeah.
But the 2-color creature lands are often very good. Like
Scryland.
Yeah, I've seen the Skylands and Jeskai
they're
Temples
very
sometimes.
Scrylands in like the most control-y decks or like hard combo decks maybe, but I don't like them in general.
I dislike them in control as well, or in everything other than control or combo.
Yeah, I agree. I just think they're too slow and don't do enough.
Yeah, in general, we talked about it in the first episode, but this format's really fast.
Yeah.
And so taking a turn off to develop your mana with a tap land, you better be doing something else in addition to developing your mana. And scry one, or maybe getting to contingently or to draw a card some other time when you draw this land, is oftentimes not enough.
So I'll just explain quickly why we think they're all right in combo and control, but not okay in other decks.
Sure.
So the reason they're all right in combo is you're the proactive deck. You're trying to assemble your thing as fast as possible, and setting up your mana on turn 1 with the dual land is really proactive, and just getting a little bit of card filtration while doing that is often enough to make it worthwhile to play, especially in 2-color decks where you're more limited on dual lands you can play. And in control decks, you're often not doing anything on turn 1 anyways. Even if you have a Ponder or Preordain type effect, you don't know what you need yet because you haven't seen what your opponent's doing.
Yeah.
So you want to wait to cast it until you know what you need to find. And so doing it on turn 1 is often great.
Control decks also have a lot of catch-up mechanics. Wrath really helps remedy the fact that you're not
card
doing stuff on
advantage.
turn 1 or 2.
Exactly. And so you're set up for the game to go late. And so the missing the beat on the turn 1 won't really matter. Whereas in the other decks, you just need to be doing things on the first few turns. And so whether you're drawing and you're like, man, I can't remember how many times I've said, all right, rip land. And then I rip tap land, and I'm like, man, why didn't I wish for an untapped land?
It feels horrendous. Yeah, and I think that in general with tap lands, if you draw them at the wrong time, it can literally just be the end of the game.
Well,
right?
it throws off your tempo.
Right,
It throws
exactly.
off those nice curving out hands. We go 1, 2, 3, tap land. No, why couldn't you be untapped?
And the nice thing about the cycle lands is that they're fetchable, and so a lot of the times you can fetch for them on turn 1, and then you know you're never drawing them, which is good.
There's like an entire hierarchy now of what lands you fetch for.
Yeah.
When.
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh,
Maybe
yeah,
we should
it's
do a whole
important.
episode on that. It's
Yeah, you're like,
how
when do you
to
crack
fetch.
when do you crack for a tapped Rav Duel? When do you crack for an untapped land to bluff a spell, even if you don't? Just like the mental games and everything here.
Yeah.
So I want to try and do like a little wrap up with everybody
Yeah, because
before we move on.
we've
to stuff.
talked about very
A lot of
broad
stuff.
strokes, and mentioned a handful of cards. What I wanted to mention at the end here is that like there's literally too many cards for us to mention.
I love this format.
To give you ideas. It's like oh, I'm building this deck. What I do. It's like we could not list them on this podcast. However, there's many resources that you can utilize. Taking this general information of like how do I concept a deck, how do I account for curve, how many lands do I vaguely keep, what things do I need to think about. Once you have that in mind, you can look at, we have a public database that I need to update with new cards, but I put together a list of all
Playable
the
cards.
form. Well, not just playables, like. Because I've seen Ben's list and it's pretty sketchy.
Yeah, Lucky Charms skewed that.
Yeah, mine.
Those cards were all bona fide playable.
Yeah, the
cut
list.
the bad ones.
Yeah, the list I put together was format staples, which is like cards that see play in our format, and that's like more than once.
Yeah.
Like these are cards that just show up over and over again.
Time to skew the numbers.
No, don't. You can't do that because it's subjective. So we have that. Looking at other people's lists and especially looking at performing lists.
Why does this work?
It's just like this deck and this archetype wins a lot. Why is that? What singles is it playing? You can look at that for reference and look at several different lists because even ones within the same archetype will be like 10, 15 cards different.
Yeah, if not more.
And both of them can be doing well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, like, there's lots of places you can look for like playable cards. We We might have to just do like another episode on just like assessing singles.
Oh,
yeah,
it's hard.
I'm sure we could.
But those are the resources I think, looking at other people's tapped out decks for, what cards they're playing, you can maybe take some ideas from one deck and, from another deck and kind of bosh those together with your own kind of thing that you're trying to do. As we roll forward, we'll probably, with the podcast, we're probably going to be talking about a lot more singles. But the fact of the matter is that we are going to have to let people do their own research to find them because there's like so many cards.
we can't evaluate every card by itself, but what we're trying to do is give you the resources to be able to do the evaluation yourself and figure out, A, is this card good enough to play in such a fast format, and B, is this card good in your deck?
Liam, you got a closing statement?
Well, yeah, what I was hoping we could do quite quickly is if someone wants to, and I can if no one else does, but maybe in like a minute or less go through the process of how they built either their last deck or the deck before that, and just sort of like what was the idea that got you there, and then what did you actually do that got you to the final list. And I can do it in a minute if no one else can.
All right, go real fast,
All right,
because we're
perfect.
running low on time.
So the last deck I played was Paradox Engine Storm.
Oh, baby.
So this is a deck that's using Paradox Engine, which is a 5-mana artifact that untaps all your non-land permanents whenever you cast a spell. And I said, okay, I want to cast Paradox Engine. I decided you can either do this with creatures or artifacts. I decided to do it with artifacts. So I went and I found all of the 2-mana artifacts that I thought were playable. I put them in my deck that made mana. Then
That's really good because they basically have haste.
They do. They're very good. Then I went and found all of the draw 7 cards because I knew I was going to be emptying my hand really aggressively. I put all of those in my
Wheel
deck.
of Fortune.
Yeah. Then I went and found all of the tutors that found Paradox Engine. I put all of those in my deck. Then I went and found all the tutors that found draw 7s that were free and not on the points list. I put those in my deck. And then I decided to put in a couple of different cards to actually win the game. I put an Emrakul in my deck. I put an Aetherflux Reservoir in my deck. Has 2 ways to win the game. And then
That's dank, by the way.
It's pretty good. And then for the final sort of 5-ish cards, I looked at what the rest of my deck was and thought, what else helps? I put Channel in my deck because it A, combos with Emrakul, and B, can help you cast a bunch of mana rocks on turn 1. I then went and looked online at someone else who had played a similar deck list and basically just stole 4 tech cards they put in their deck. So I played Silence, I played a Swords to Plowshares.
Just the one of?
Just the one of, yeah. It was my only removal
It's
spell.
really good.
It was very good, yeah. And then I put in the cantrips, was the last thing. Just some blue cantrips to help set it up, trigger Paradox Engine, and that was it. I had my deck.
Worth mentioning, he beat me on Monday with this list, so it performed.
Yeah, it was a good deck.
Cool. I like
And
your
then,
process.
and then after that, it's just a matter of fine-tuning,
Right.
testing, and
Inspiration, research, and then tuning.
Right. All I decided was I want to ask a lot of questions. I want to ask one big complicated question, which is, can you beat Paradox Engine with a bunch of stuff in play?
answer probably not.
Right, and then I found a bunch of stuff that went with that.
All right, Alex, you want to take us home with the a returning segment, Powerful Magic?
So, I'm on Aristocrats, which is a deck that sort of wins by gaining advantage out of sacrificing my own creatures or arranging for them to have accidents.
Yeah.
And my
I like
opponent,
that.
yeah,
That's so morbid.
yeah, it's really morbid. So my opponent,
Which is apt.
it's true. Getting morbid triggered is actually very, very important.
Death Reap Ritual.
Death Reap Ritual. My opponent's on Reanimator. It might have been White X Control. I think it was Reanimator. So
Sure.
they go Elish Norn.
Oh,
I'm like-
Elish Norn, the
and
bane of all creature
Against
strategies.
a creature-based strategy, like the card is absolutely backbreaking.
Right, so it's 7 mana for a
For
4/7
Vigilance.
vigilance that gives all enemy creatures -2/-2 and all your creatures +2/+2.
Yeah.
Alex
So-
doesn't have a lot of creatures
that
with
looks
more than 2
yeah.
toughness.
This looked like bad news, but then I was like, wait, I have Outpost Siege in play. which
Choosing
is
the much maligned.
Choosing the much maligned,
Dragons.
ping.
Whenever a creature you control leaves play, deal 1 damage to target creature or player.
I believe that is the Dragons mode, right?
I sort of scratched my head at this and I was like, I'm okay with this.
Nailed it.
And
Dragons mode.
I spent the rest of the game just playing, 2 toughness creatures into this Elish Norn debuff, having them die as state-based actions, and I pinged him to death.
I love it.
When
You're like,
often these
2 mana,
creatures
1
you
damage.
play will also bring another creature back, which
Yeah,
will
so-
also die.
Yep. So you just
So
play
it's
like
like,
a 2-for-1 creature that's
play
like,
Doom Traveler, ping you for 1, get a Spirit, ping you for 1, go.
This is how the creature deck won through Elish Norn.
Yep.
I love it. It's powerful magic.
There you go.
Pretty good.
Just like, I couldn't lose for winning, or couldn't win for losing. I don't know.
You did it.
You did it.
You battled through it.
Got there.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you to my co-host, as always, for being here. It's been wonderful. I want to thank you to the viewers. We've been getting a lot of wonderful support from the past episode, and that's great. And so thank you so much for that. I want to thank you because this episode is brought to you by you through our Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. We're going to continue doing this podcast. And
Did you tell us what parts you like?
yeah. So down in the comments below, let us know sections you like, what you're looking forward to. We're going to be sure any of the deck lists we talked about, probably just Red Deck wins and maybe one other that we brought up a bunch.
Big Red, maybe?
Big Red,
Yeah.
we'll throw in the comments below so that you have a chance to look at these lists and stuff like that.
If you have questions about them too, you can tweet at us.
Hit us up on Twitter. You'll find it in the descriptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of our Twitters will be there.
And what is next episode going to be?
Next episode is going to be the Ixalan set review.
Oh boy!
Now keep in mind we're going to be looking at this through a Highlander lens specifically. So not is it limited playable, not is it standard playable, but does this work in the context of Highlander? And there's some cards, some big cards to compare that to.
Basically, we're going to take a skimming of
Yeah.
just stuff that's interesting, because there's a lot of stuff that exists in, especially new sets, that are just like, these are cards for draft. We don't need to worry about
Or
them.
even a lot of the cards for standard, we can
You can just
push
not
to the side.
Like,
They cost 2 to 3
And
mana too
maybe
much.
if we've got some time, we'll talk about some trap cards too.
ooh,
Yeah,
not
some
literally subtype trap cards.
No,
but-
cards that we think might be playable, but you're like, no, don't do it.
Trap Tribal.
Right. But anyways, this is us at North 100 saying thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.